So right, keeping an open dialogue. That was Charlie Kirk's message, and he lived by it until his dying day. And tomorrow, of course, as we said, tens of thousands are going to be at State Farm Stadium in Glendale, Arizona, to honor and mourn a man who stood up for traditional values and free speech. Here with us now is U.S. Ambassador to Israel and former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee. It is so good to see you, Ambassador. Yeah, I mean, you know, obviously we've been mourning so much here. You have clearly. It's really strange and delicate times right now in this country. And I want to get into that with you from your perspective, being over there in a little bit. But first, tell me about Charlie Kirk, the Charlie Kirk that you knew and the impact that he had.
Rob, I knew Charlie since he was around 19 years old and it really first started Turning Point. I was impressed with him from the first time I ever met him. He was incredibly charismatic, brilliant, and had an extraordinary ability to communicate. I honestly think Charlie Kirk could have been president someday. He had that kind of capacity. But for him to go to college campuses all over this country to speak so calmly, so effectively to people who were coming to a microphone essentially to try to challenge him and to trip him up, they just couldn't do it. In fact, when I was leaving to come to Israel, Charlie took my time slot on the daily television program that I'd been doing for TBN. I went to Phoenix. We went out to his headquarters. It was my last show for that series and his first. And so we kind of did the handoff. This was such a shock when it happened. But here's what I'm noticing. The message of Charlie Kirk is being heard by millions and millions of people who would have never listened to him. So if the intent was to silence his voice, it's only been amplified exponentially as people now are realizing why he was such an incredibly effective, powerful, and quite frankly, I would say this, really a cutting edge figure of giving a viewpoint, but doing it in a way that was just winsome and captivating.
So true. And, you know, one of the main things that Charlie talked about was his devotion to faith. And it turned out to be his final message to Americans. Take a listen.
Corinthians 5 and 15. So that's all pretty amazing evidence, not just intra-biblical evidence, but extra-biblical evidence that Jesus Christ was a real person. He lived a perfect life. He was crucified, died, and rose on the third day, and he is Lord and God over all.
You know, this country, there is a growing cancer, you know, nihilistic, atheistic push in this country. Cardinal Dolan mentioned it too the other day. That, you know, he kind of sees Charlie as a modern day martyr, you know, evangelizing in really in the true sense of the word. Do you see that?
Absolutely, I do, Rob. In fact, I'm not sure that anyone since Billy Graham has been as clear about presenting the gospel as Charlie Kirk has. And his first job really was not a preacher or evangelist, but he was far more effective than most any preacher or evangelist that I know. Certainly in this current generation, there's no one even close to it because his message was authentic. It wasn't something he said. It was who he was. It was what he believed. He spoke about it with such ease, such a sense of comfort. A lot of people, when they try to talk about their faith, they do it, but they stumble through it because they're a little nervous about it. There was nothing about Charlie's faith that he was nervous about. He was grateful that he knew who he was, who God was, who Christ was in his life. And so when he talked about his relationship to Jesus Christ, it was not something that he kind of cowered from. He went straight on, but he did it with an extraordinary sense of knowledge, understanding, and biblical conviction. Very strong.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. And I asked people to go and see some of his videos of him on campus having an actual debate, like debates are supposed to happen, with people who had a completely opposing point of view. Maybe they left thinking the same way, but it was fun to watch their arguments fall apart, I have to tell you that much. Let me ask you, so from your perspective now, your perch in Israel, as you look at the United States from afar, if you will, what are you seeing?
Well, it breaks my heart to see college campuses that once were the bastions of free speech become now places where people are told to shut up. It's also very troubling to see anti-Semitism rear its ugly head on places that should be places of intellectual curiosity, places of knowledge, rather than places of ignorance and hate. Those are things that Charlie was so effective in standing against, pushing back on. I do know this, Charlie is loved in Israel. You wouldn't think that 8,000 miles away, that somehow Charlie's death would have such an impact. But I was at a Shabbat dinner just last night in Jerusalem, and there were several teenagers, part of the family. Every one of them were big fans of Charlie Kirk. Charlie has been to Israel many times. He was here when the embassy was moved in 2018, but he was beloved here. And for good cause. He was a strong supporter of the relationship with Israel. And Charlie just understood biblical convictions like no other. He is going to be missed incredibly. But I'm so glad that we have hours upon hours of his messaging, because that's messaging that is timeless. And one of the things that I so appreciate about Charlie is that when he spoke to people who disagreed with him, he did it with kindness and compassion. He never belittled people. He didn't berate them. Unlike a lot of the late night comics, so-called comics on TV, he genuinely cared about people, even the ones who hated him. That's what made him so effective.
So a couple blocks from here, starting next week, we're going to have the miscreants, the anti-Semites, the rotten apples of the world gathering at the United Nations. Obviously, they are not pro-Israel. And then you have the countries that should know better, you know, the Portugals, the Spains, the Great Britons, the Frances, who are saying, you know, two-state solution and recognizing Palestine and all this kind of stuff. What's the latest on the conflict in Gaza? And, you know, what can you tell us that we should know here? Because obviously the G word, genocide, is being thrown around way too much.
Rob, it's the dumbest thing I've ever heard to say that Israel is committing genocide.
I know.
I told Piers Morgan, I said, if Israel is committing genocide, they're really, really bad at it. Look, all of Gaza is the size of Las Vegas. This is a country that put to their knees Iran, which is 10 times their size. The fact is that the reason this has gone on as long as it has, and it's way too long, is because Hamas is so stubborn. They're not listening to what President Trump and what the Israelis have told them. Hamas has no future here. They're not going to stay. They're not going to govern any more than it would make sense to let the Nazis have a role in the future of Germany after World War II. They've got to go. They slaughtered, massacred, mutilated, humiliated people who were civilians, babies, pregnant women. They raped women in front of their families, for heaven's sakes. They took hostages, tortured them, murdered them. They still have hostages that they're holding. They've murdered their own citizens and put their citizens in harm's way. They can't stay. And the fact is, there's so much pressure being put on Israel. This is insane. And if Macron and other European leaders want to have a Palestinian state and want to reward Hamas for their actions, which is what they're doing by this little stunt they're pulling at the UN. And by the way, the UN ought to stand for useless nonsense. But if they really want a Palestinian state, I would suggest that Macron might give up some pieces of his land to create one right along the French Riviera. Yeah. It's a nice piece of property, and it wouldn't take that much land from the French Riviera, and he can have his Palestinian state. But he shouldn't impose it upon Israel when right now they're trying to fight for their lives against people that every day try to kill them.
Yeah, too many people who should know better have lost the sense of right and wrong in this world right now, and hopefully that gets corrected soon. Ambassador, I can't think of a better person to represent our flag in Israel than you, and it's so good to talk to you again.
Rob, always a pleasure. Great to be with you. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you.